First-person shooters all have a lot of common mechanics, and that means there's a lot of common blunders to make. Hi folks, it's Falcon, and today on gameranx, 10 mistakes every FPS gamer makes. Starting off with number 10, it's wasting abilities and secondaries. These are some of the most frustrating mistakes out there in multiplayer games because while secondary abilities can be incredibly helpful in the right hands, in the wrong hands, they can be less than useless. How many times have we all thrown a flashbang into a room just because, without thinking things like, are there easy escape routes? Will I actually hit anyone at this angle? Is there anybody even in there? And that's just one example. Like, what about tossing smoke grenades into a house? Not thinking about the fact that you're basically just telling the enemy exactly where you're attacking from? Or putting down claymore mines in places where they're easy to see or in places no one will actually go? In some games, it's not really that big of a deal. You just respawn and try again. But in something like Valorant, a wasted ability can make all of the difference. It's tempting to use certain abilities at the start of the round, for example, but a lot of the time you're just spending money on an ability that's going to run out before anyone actually hits it. Like, there's so many games that this point applies to, but the gist of it is that secondary weapons and powers can be tempting to just throw out whenever you're really thinking about it, but a lot of the time can really bite you in the ass. And number 9 is picking the wrong weapons for the wrong situations. You know when you've done this, like this sort of thing applies to both multiplayer and single player, and it sucks either way. You go into a level with a shotgun, but the game expects you to have a sniper rifle, you pick up a pistol in Halo, but you're actually going to need a rocket launcher, etc. A lot of the time it's impossible to know what's coming next in a game, and when you're playing a game like Halo with a 2-weapon limit, sometimes you're going to go into a firefight unprepared or poorly equipped to handle the situation. It's especially annoying in multiplayer, even if it's something you end up learning pretty quickly. You go into a map for the first time, you might think that it's all about long sight lines or sniper positions, so you bring a big rifle, and you find out it's all tight corridors where close range weapons are best. In those situations, people learn from their mistakes pretty quick, but if you're playing something more like a battle royale mode, you might run into this mistake more often. The random nature of battle royale games means that inevitably, you're going to be straight up outgunned sometimes, and that's obviously not always a mistake, it's just bad luck in this case. But there's also a lot of situations where people did have access to the right weapon and passed it up because they weren't thinking. Like, a lot of people, for whatever reason, make the mistake of getting 2 rifles at the same time, even though there were good submachine guns around. Just pass them up for rifles, and when you inevitably get in a close range fight, like, they lose. This kind of habit in multiplayer games can be frustrating, but in a single player game, it's just annoying. It's especially bad when the game puts a bunch of guns that you need in your path, but you've got the weapon that you want to keep using it, you don't want to swap it out for anything else, then you move on and you're kicking yourself for not picking up the gun that you needed. In single player games, yeah, you want to play the game the way you want, but sometimes that leads to major frustration. And number 8 is screwing around with the setting for way too long. Now, we don't know about you, but for us, messing with the settings can be a huge mistake. Not because we'll screw up the game or anything, but we get obsessed with it. And sure, this is something you can do for pretty much any game, but when it comes to FPS games, I feel like getting the settings just right can be really important, almost more so than other genres, because of, accuracy and sensitivity, stuff like that. I know there's other people out there like this, people who constantly fiddle with the control and the graphical settings on an FPS game to get things feeling just right. The only problem is what happens when they never actually feel just right. Like, that's the danger of going into the settings. Every game has different sensitivity settings, so adjusting them can be a huge chore. Then there's graphics. If you're not on a top-of-the-line machine, trying to get the settings right for a game can take forever, and it seems almost random sometimes which settings affect the FPS the most. Obviously, things like texture quality and anti-aliasing are a huge hit, but sometimes post-processing is almost nothing, while in other games it can cause the FPS to drop like a rock. Trying to test your settings in certain games can be especially annoying when there's auto saves. Like, hope you don't mind watching and rewatching that opening cutscene for like 30 seconds until the skip button appears. Trying to get the perfect settings can be a stressful and laborious process, and games are supposed to be fun. Sometimes good is enough. And number 7 is staying too stationary or pushing too hard. Here's a mistake that basically no one can deny they haven't made at least once in a while. FPS games, especially when you get into the competitive space, are primarily about positioning and reflexes. It's not really a mistake to have bad reflexes. That's something that can, for people at the highest levels of play at least, take years of practice. And it's not something that everybody can overcome 100% of the time. But when it comes to positioning, that's really more a matter of strategy rather than physical skill. There's so so many examples of this kind of thing. Like, you can bunker down for too long, you get surrounded, you weren't aggressive enough, and you paid the price. On the flip side, we can all think of the times we rushed forward unprepared and got gunned down almost immediately in pretty much any FPS game. These are mistakes everybody makes because every game works differently. Like, you join a game in Valorant or Counter-Strike where the gameplay is a lot more defensive focused, but you're used to playing more aggressive games and you end up paying for it. Or you might join Call of Duty or something and play too cautiously, slowly moving around while your enemies are constantly rushing you with submachine guns. Hell, just being too static in general in many of these games can be seen as a mistake. Sometimes you gotta be hopping around, strafing and crouching all the time to survive, and if you don't do any of that, you're easy prey. It's the kind of thing that makes you wince to see it, and when you do it, you know that you screwed up. It's just that sometimes this stuff can be a hard habit to break. And number 6 is never using the BFG. We did a list a while back about mistakes RPG gamers make, and of course we mentioned the thing that everybody does, which is get really good items and then never use them. You know, like when you get a Mega Elixir that fully restores all the health and magic, and it'd be really useful for a boss, but who knows, it might come in handy later, so you just save it, and it sits on your inventory, roll credits, and you're like, oh, I never used that. This is exactly that, but for FPS games. Any game that has like a really good gun with limited ammo, I would apply this to. Like, the most obvious example is the BFG 9000, especially in Doom 2016 and Eternal, where it has its own special ammo supply. The gun is awesome for clearing out crowds and can be a lifesaver in situations where you're getting overwhelmed, but instead of using it, you just let it collect dust in your inventory. Yeah, you might use it if there's an extra charge lying around the arena and you're already at max ammo, but otherwise, you're saving it. What if something tougher comes along? What if I really get stuck and I really need it? That's generally how we justify never using this type of stuff. They make it so there's just enough ammo for you to think about using it, but also to never actually use it. This applies to so many other games as well. Like, who hasn't picked up a rocket launcher or a Spartan laser or whatever in Halo and just never used it? Sure, there's a tank right there you could easily take out with a rocket or two, but instead you try to plink away at it with a machine gun or something. Scarcity in games makes us all hoarders, even in FPS games. Hell, especially in FPS games. And number 5 is missing a jump. Well, just a quick acknowledge, this is probably one of the most understandable mistakes on this list. Because FPS platforming is usually frustrating. It's a lot harder to tell where you're going to land in first person, and it's almost universally awkward to do with very few exceptions. Newer games have mechanics to make things a little more tolerable, like being able to mantle onto ledges and double jump and air dash makes things a little easier, but there's still going to be situations in something like Doom Eternal where you're going to jump, you're going to think you're headed in the right direction, and you fall into a bottomless pit. Like, FPS platforming is just hard as it is. Because every single game has slightly different controls for their jumps. It's one mistake that everybody's eventually going to make when they have to play a bunch of games with platforming. I mean, at least Doom Eternal is pretty forgiving about it. Unlike older FPS games like Half-Life, where if you missed a jump, you were just dead. Hope you remember to quick save. Also, now with Battle Royale games, we don't have to just worry about missing a little jump. A bad fall can pretty much set the stage for an entire match. Most Battle Royale games start you out with a drop, you fall onto the map and pick where you want to go. Sometimes you get a little fancy and land on a roof or a window. It's cool, but there's inevitably going to be a time where you totally botch it and crash into a wall or overshoot a roof or just land in a terrible spot. Pretty much every FPS these days has some kind of jump, and as long as you're in first person, there's always going to be mistakes that you make. It's just always going to happen when you're forced to platform in an FPS. At number 4, friendly fire, shooting your allies. In certain FPS games, telling a friend from a foe can be a little difficult. Like in any modern military shooter, a lot of the times just two different armies in camo shooting at each other, and actually telling them apart can be a bit of a challenge. This is one of those mistakes that can go down in both multiplayer or single player FPS games. In multiplayer, you do it because you're on edge and prone to shooting at just about anything that comes around the corner, while in single player games, it's more of a situation where you just can't tell the dudes apart. It sucks in single player games where shooting your allies gets you an instant game over, but it's especially bad in multiplayer. Like, you can get branded a team killer even when you do it by mistake. Like, it often just doesn't matter. People are just going to be pissed. For multiplayer games, there's a point where most new players get out of the habit of just shooting everything that wanders into their sights. You eventually start to notice little differences between your guys and the other guys, and once you get accustomed to the game, the trigger finger starts to get a little less itchy. So for online games at least, I feel like this mistake mistake is mostly a noob trap. In single-player games, though, sometimes they just make it really hard to tell your allies from your enemies. And it's intentional. At a certain point, it's just a flip of a coin whether you shoot at the military guy with the greenish-brown camo or the military guy with the brownish-green camo. Or maybe he's got that gray urban camo. Oh wait, no, that's too much of a difference. And number 3 is ignoring the objectives. This is kind of a newbie mistake, but it's something that we all do once in a while. I'm not just talking about objective-based multiplayer games like Battlefield either. This applies to pretty much any game where there's objectives. These days, multiplayer is where you're going to see most objective-based games. In multiplayer games, we're all tempted to just run around and look for guys to shoot. Obviously, it's the point of these games, being first-person shooters and all, but for certain game types, it's really better to focus on completing objectives, both from a personal standpoint and for the entire team. In a lot of these games, scoring kills doesn't actually mean much. Everybody just respawns, and the real goal is about capturing control points, disarming bombs, or getting the flag. At a certain point, killing dudes is just a waste of time. You're not really assisting the team, you're not really hurting the enemy team, but it is also so much fun that you can't help but do it. If you like winning the games, ignoring the objective can be a huge mistake, even in ones where it seems like you don't contribute much. It's such a basic thing, just having an understanding of what you're supposed to do in a multiplayer game and then doing it, but it's probably one of the most common mistakes out there. And number 2 is not working as a team. Like, this is an obvious one, right? You join a team game or battle royale, but instead of sticking with the group and communicating, you go lone wolf. Doesn't matter how team focused the game is and how totally unmatched you're gonna be when you do it, it just doesn't matter. You wanna go to the airport? Screw that, I'm going to the stadium. We barely need to explain why this is a mistake, you know? Everybody does it sometimes, especially when you're playing on a public server. We've all seen teammates all going opposite directions when playing battle royale games, or even in more focused games like Counter-Strike. What inevitably happens when the lone wolf gets into a 3-on-1 or a 4-on-1 situation and gets killed. Of course, there's plenty of pro MLG gamers out there who do just fine. They can handle being alone, whatever, even in team games, but for most of us, refusing to work as a team usually leads to death, at least in a game where the team is the focus. It's the same reason people ignore objectives. They want to get on the ground and just do what they want, gameplay be damned, but depending on the game, this is a regular old mistake, or possibly a really big mistake, and a mistake we all do sometimes. And number 1 is constantly reloading for no reason. If there is one mistake anyone who plays FPS games makes at some point, it's probably this one. Like, we all do that, right? If a game gives you the option to reload, I'm gonna do it constantly. It's one of those things you gotta train yourself out of, but it's really tempting. Took a pot shot at a guy, reload. Running into an enemy base, but I've only got 20 bullets in my clip, reload. Oh, I just shot one more bullet, reload. I can't help it, and I don't even need to ask. I know there's a ton of people out there just like that. Like, if you're a true degenerate and like to live dangerously, then you're the total opposite and you never reload even when you actually should. For us constant reloaders, it's sickening to see, but we've got to respect the game at least. Most of the time, it's just a kind of annoying habit, but if you're playing competitively, it can be the difference between winning and losing. Many players get in the habit of instinctively reloading after every kill, even if there are possibly enemies nearby, and if they catch you reloading, you know what that means, you're dead. Reloading is such an elemental part of a lot of FPS games, and you love to see a good, satisfying reload animation, but if you do it all the time, or hell, just at the wrong time, you'll see what a mistake non-stop reloading can be. And that's all for today. Leave us a comment, let us know what you think. If you like this video, click like. If you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so. We upload brand new videos every day of the week. Best way to see them first is, of course, a subscription. As always, thank you very much for watching this video. I'm Falcon. You can follow me on Twitter @FalconTheHero, and we'll see you next time right here on gameranx.